related show are those of the show personalities and guest alone, and not those of Vic Canellis Media Group, its parent, affiliates, or stations. VCMG Live is not responsible for any content, information, or opinions expressed. User bears full responsibility for their reliance on such content, information, or opinions.
Welcome to Making Money with Laura Sanders, a name you can trust. With over 20 years of real estate experience and selling over 150 homes a year, Laura Sanders is the #1 RE/MAX agent in the state of Florida for 2021. Join us each week as we discuss how to make money through buying and flipping homes, to renting versus selling, and everything in between. To join the conversation, call in live 888-994-4995, Studio A.
Hi everyone, welcome to Making Money with Laura Sanders, and I am your host, Laura Sanders. Every week we talk about something that will help you make a little money, save a little money, or maybe just help you navigate this crazy world that we live in. Today we're going to talk about insurance, and we're going to also be a little more specific and talk about flood insurance. I love how people get so confused on flood insurance and what some people think flood insurance is and what it really is. So today with us we have Brandon Felder with Goosehead Insurance. Welcome, Brandon.
How's it going? Good to see you again.
So a lot of people get confused, first of all, what is flood insurance, right? They think if their washer machine breaks in their house, they need flood insurance.
Yeah. So, most people think if there's a water, that's flood.
Right.
But
could be a flood, but it's not that kind of flood. It
could be a flood, The way that I like to define it in layman's terms that makes it easiest is rising water from the outside.
And that's also how they define it, the insurance company.
So if you have a roof leak, it's raining, Hurricane Karen's coming this year. We'll see how bad she is. But
she's a real Karen.
Yeah. So it's raining down, it goes through your roof, comes in your house, and water starts to rise. Well, that is rising water from the inside, not from the outside.
Okay, so even though the rain is from the outside.
Correct. Now, let's say Hurricane Karen comes, water fills up your street, fills up your driveway, goes up into the front setup of your house, and then comes in your house. That is what flood insurance is for.
Okay. And one of the things that I learned recently when we had the floods in Fort Lauderdale about 1.5 years, 2 years ago, was that flood insurance only covers up to a certain amount.
Not really. So my favorite thing to say on the show.
Depends on the carrier.
Depends on the carrier. So there are two different types of flood policies. There are flood policies through FEMA, through the National Flood Insurance Program.
Okay.
And there are private flood insurance companies.
Now I heard something about FEMA going out of business.
Yeah. So let's talk about that.
Is that true?
So FEMA is I believe, I don't know if I'm saying this right, but appropriated by Congress. Everything goes through the government. We're seeing a lot of government cuts right now. And so FEMA and the NFIP, or National Flood Insurance Program, as of right now are in place until at least September of this year.
Okay. So is that through like the policies like the National Right policy? Is that FEMA?
Yeah. So Right flood insurance, that's just one carrier. So the way that it works is you have the National Flood Insurance Program, and I, as a broker, I can go directly to them to get a policy, or they have something called a WYO program, a Write Your Own policy program.
Okay.
So there's other insurance carriers that basically link up with the National Flood Insurance Program system with all the same policy numbers and underwriting requirements and things, and I can get the policy through them. So they're essentially servicing it.
Okay.
So Right Flood is one of the companies that do that. Selective Flood, Progressive does it.
So
most companies do it.
Even if the FEMA goes out, these policies still will be enforced.
I don't know the answer to that, and I don't know that anybody knows the answer to that.
Okay.
But they are serviced by these carriers, but the liability is held by FEMA.
Okay.
And so if FEMA goes under, what happens to those? I don't know.
And yet we're paying, like, for instance, I think I pay, like, on my primary, like, $850 a year, right?
Depending on the flood zone and where it's at, it's not much.
So then what would be our our recourse? Do you have any idea? Have you seen any research on this?
I haven't. It all depends on what happens. Kind of like Department of Education, it looks like they're dismantling that. And so where do those funds go to? It goes to the states. What's going to happen to those funds? People that get it. I think it's up in the air. The same thing's going to happen with FEMA if they decide to dismantle FEMA. Now, I don't think that, in my opinion, we're going to see dismantling of emergency assistance for Americans. I
Okay.
think that will be there. Now, whether if it goes through FEMA or they do something else, I think that there will be something in place. And then with flood insurance, they might privatize it. They're even talking about privatizing Fannie and Freddie, which could be a big deal on the loan side. So not to go too much into that, but I don't know what would happen. If we had Max on the show, he'd probably say, well, we have an idea. My idea is that if FEMA goes away, then we would have to go with private flood insurance companies. And it would
Which we have that now.
We have that. Yeah,
What's
I write
the
a lot
price
of those.
difference between, what I guess FEMA is writing under and what private? Is it more, and is it better coverage anyway with the private?
It's definitely better coverage.
Okay.
And you're going to have a way easier
Now,
time with
FEMA's always the
claims.
max is $250, right?
Max is $250 on building, $100,000 on contents, so any personal property.
What about like if you have nowhere to live? Like I knew of people that had nowhere to live.
So that's what we call loss of use coverage. So private markets typically offer that. FEMA doesn't. And so, it's
Interesting. So
It's a-
you're on your own. If
I'm
you
guessing
have
it's gonna
rising
go
water, your
private.
insurance.
But let's just answer the question here.
Right.
Is it cheaper? I sell a lot of private insurance policies that are cheaper than FEMA.
Do people
in
offer that?
most-
Or
in-
would they go and offer that or they wouldn't? Why wouldn't they?
Yeah, the private carriers offer it. So when I'm quoting somebody for flood, pretty much every time I'm going to FEMA
Right.
or National Flood Insurance Program, and I'm going to a private carrier.
What are some of the
And-
private carriers for it?
Like the names. My favorite one is Neptune Flood. They're super easy. I can
Okay.
quote it in like.
And what does the
15
typical
seconds.
policy coverage look like on that?
So you're going to have your dwelling coverage and your contents coverage, so the
Okay.
building and any of your belongings. But then they have a bunch of ancillary coverages. So they have replacement cost for your contents, which is usually like $30 or $80 more for the year to get. They have pool repair and refill, which is that can happen.
Oh, so if we have a flood, the pool would pop?
The pool can pop from a flood. They have $10,000 or $20,000 in coverage to live somewhere else, loss of use. So those are just some of them.
Okay.
But those, they're really good. Not that I'm trying to.
So
push
why
them,
would you
but-
not? But that's my question. Why would you not utilize them?
Yeah. So anywhere on the coast, like Barrier Island, Fort Lauderdale, Pompano Beach, close to the ocean, or like I do a lot of business in Marco Island. Marco Island, the flood is more expensive than anywhere else, the flood insurance. And in those places, a lot of times the private market companies are going to be like, we don't even want to touch them.
Really?
Because Marco Island is just really expensive. And if they're
Is
willing
that only
to,
after what happened a few years ago?
well, they look at the data and they see how many flood losses have we had in a certain zip code or a certain area.
Okay.
And if the data is saying we've had too many losses here, well, in order for them to sell a policy, it's going to be through the roof, or they're just going to say we don't want to touch it.
Okay.
So typically that happens in Marco Island. I'm writing FEMA policies there every time. Over here on the East Coast or elsewhere in Florida, it really depends on where it's at. But most of the time in any, inland, 10, 15, 20 miles inland, the FEMA policy and the private market company are going to be pretty similar in price.
Okay. Well, the other thing is that people come from out of state, and sometimes they'll see that we have, lakes in the back of the houses, but a lot of those lakes are managed by the water districts.
Correct.
And they can lower them and increase them. So a lot of times people will say to me, oh, but you're going to need flood insurance for this, because what if that floods into my house, which typically in some of these homes that are built in like 1990s. Like, that's not going to happen.
Yeah. So my house, I had this conversation with my wife this week. We just planted hedges around our whole house. And my wife was like, our house is really built up. And I said, yeah, they built it up on purpose. If you stand on the street versus our front door, it's going to be pretty good difference in height.
Right.
Maybe 1.5 feet, 2 feet. And that's how they built them.
Right.
Just for this reason. But if you really think about it, Laura, I mean, there's certain neighborhoods, especially Fort Lauderdale, that just have terrible drainage. But a lot of times
those properties aren't even on water. They're just that's just from rain.
Yeah, but most neighborhoods like out west, even if they have a canal behind, the water has to go so high.
Yeah.
Just to go up the grass, up your backyard, up. Typically, people have a 4 to 6 inch step into their house.
Yeah.
And it's not just getting up to there, it's everything around it,
Right.
And so, I mean, I want to make money, I want to sell insurance policies, but if we're going to be honest, if you're not in a specific flood zone, a special flood hazard area, it's very unlikely.
Right. Well, it's funny because I had a house in Fort Lauderdale, and I guess you could say I got lucky. I sold it. I had it for over 20 years.
Wow.
And then I sold it maybe 8 months before that flood happened, and that area was affected greatly. In 20 years that I owned it, it had never been affected.
Yeah,
It's
that was
crazy.
so one of the things that FEMA looks at is the way they look at flood zones is they'll describe them on the chance of a flood within so many years. So every 100 years or every 250 years, every 500 years. And so that was just one of those crazy storms. I mean, and it's kind of weird because we saw it twice.
Right.
But also...
Yeah,
just
within a year of each. It was weird.
Yeah, but also a lot of it really comes down to like these workers that have to go out there in a storm, move water, open valves, and I mean, I don't know if it's true or not, but I heard that didn't happen on the last one, and then they have to a lot of times they have to have devices to pull the water through.
Right.
Like pumps. And so maybe they were doing that 20 years ago and they stopped. This is where sometimes it can get political. Same thing with New Orleans. It got really political with the levee. The levee broke, and then we saw the effects from Katrina.
Right. Well, flood is definitely something that people should definitely be giving you a call about, talking to you about, seeing if it makes sense for them to have it or not to have it. And actually for you to also, which I know you're very good at, is go over the policy with them. Because I think that a lot of people were really taken back a few years ago when we had the floods and they had nowhere to live because they had mold in their homes because, once the water rises, it gets all over the drywall and
It's a big thing. And then
it's hot here.
They got to cut 4 feet of drywall, and it's a big project.
Yeah, so nobody wants to live in that, but I have. But yeah, so what's a good number for people to reach out to you if they're looking for a policy or not even sure if they need a policy?
Yeah.
You might own your house outright, and you might not realize that the flood zones have changed.
Yeah, the flood zones did change last summer. So the best way to contact me is my cell phone number, 954-326-9842. And I really desire to make a change in this industry, and that's why I think by the grace of God I've been successful in it, because I do want to go over the policy. I want you to know what you're paying for. This is very serious, and where we live, it's thousands and thousands of dollars in cost for insurance. But then going through the headache of it, you can't put a price on that a lot of times.
So if you're thinking about, getting a house here in Florida, you should definitely give Brandon a call, and he'll definitely go over what your options are. We're going to go to commercial break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about, what other kind of protection policies should one get. So stay tuned, and we'll be right back.
At JK Closing Attorneys, we do all of the same things that a title company does, but with the benefits of being a law office. We can help with residential real estate, short sales, commercial real estate, refinances, 1031 exchanges, and FRIPTA withholding.
Contact JK Closing Attorneys today at 954-332-3111. Again, that is 954-332-3111.
Whether you're buying, selling, refinancing, or building your dream home, you have a lot riding on your loan specialist. Max Fish, a top 1% mortgage loan officer in the nation, will give you a same-day qualifying quote. Max Fish is committed to providing his customers with mortgage services that exceed their expectations. Ensuring that you make the right choice for you and your family is his ultimate goal. Contact Max Fish today at 954-729-6933 or max.fisch@nwmcorp.net.
You have been watching Making Money with Laura. For more information, contact Laura Sanders at 954-650-0827 or visit her website at theloracell.com. And now back to the show.
Hi everyone, welcome back to Making Money with Laura Sanders, and I am your host, Laura Sanders. Today we're talking about insurance. There's a lot of things that go on in the insurance industry that people just don't think about. One is, what do you use your flood insurance for? Well, we've already talked about that. Another thing that people don't think about is having teenage drivers, having, things that can just go wrong at any time, and what kind of protection should you have in place to protect yourself? So, welcome back, Brandon, and we are talking about umbrella policies now, and I want you to tell people why they should have one.
Well, I think it's funny we went from talking about flood to umbrella.
Oh, that is pretty funny.
So umbrella doesn't have anything to do with rain. It doesn't have anything to do
kind of keeps the rain off of you.
It doesn't have anything to do with umbrella insurance. Doesn't have anything to do with rain. It doesn't have anything to do with any real property. Umbrella insurance is for liability. So umbrella insurance it's like an umbrella over your other insurance products. So typically your home insurance and your auto insurance. So your auto insurance has something called a bodily injury limit, and which pays for other people that might get hurt in the other vehicle. They sue you, that's going to cover that.
Right.
Minimum is $10,000 per person, $20,000 per accident. People that are well insured will have up to $500,000 in coverage there. Home insurance typically has somewhere between $100,000 and $500,000 in liability insurance.
Okay.
So umbrella is going to go on top of that. So let's just look at two scenarios. Let's look at where you use umbrella for home and where you'd use it for auto.
Okay.
And I like to call this extended lawsuit protection. It's
Okay.
the easiest way to explain it. Okay. So let's start with auto. You have a child, teenage driver, they get in a car accident. It's their fault. Totaled the other car, person gets hurt, goes to the hospital, it's $1 million in medical bills. And their policy only covers them for $50,000, their auto insurance policy. Most umbrella companies aren't going to even give you a policy unless you have $250,000 or $500,000 in auto liability coverage.
Okay.
So now let's go back and say, okay, they've got $250,000 or $500,000 in coverage. It's $1 million in damages. The umbrella insurance, your auto insurance is going to cover up to that $500,000 they have. The other $500,000 is going to be covered by the umbrella policy.
And how are the intervals of the umbrella policy written?
So typically it sells in $1 million amounts. So you can buy $1 million, 2, 3, 5, 10, in those scenarios.
So I was told that when you have Airbnbs, that they don't really want to give you an umbrella.
Well, this is probably a conversation for another show when it comes to Airbnbs. A lot of people will have their home and they'll decide, well, we're going to go buy another home, but we're going to keep our old house and we're going to make it an Airbnb. Okay. And we'll just keep our insurance. Your home insurance policy is not going to pay out.
That's Amwins. Now you need Amwins.
I do love Amwins. I just met with them last week. So but you have to tell landlords, hey, this is an Airbnb or it's a short-term rental.
Right.
Most home insurance policies aren't going to cover short-term rentals. So if you have damage to the property, they find out it's a short-term rental, they're going to say, we're not paying out. In my opinion, a lot of home insurance companies will sell a short-term rental insurance policy, but the best short-term rental insurance policy is written on commercial paper, like as a commercial policy.
Okay. What does that look like?
So the carrier that I use for that, they're giving automatically $1 million in coverage for liability. They're giving a lot more, the underwriting is a little bit heavier, but they're giving a lot more of a comprehensive coverage package to that specific situation, which is Airbnb or short-term VRBO, whatever it is. And so when you start to read in the policy the fine print, you're usually going to be better off with that product. But we should save that for another show.
Okay, we'll save that for another show.
So to go back to looking at, we talked about auto with umbrella, looking at home with umbrella. A good example, I just had this happen. I've only had one claim like this, thankfully in the past year. It's been like 18 months. I had a guy that he owned his property, hired a contractor to do some work in his bathroom. Contractor hired a subcontractor. Subcontractor said they got hurt on the property, was suing the homeowner and the contractor because they were a subcontractor. Now, that's where an umbrella policy could come in place. Now, what ended up falling through is it was a BS claim. They were just fishing for money. But let's say they really did get hurt. It's $1 million lawsuit. They had, I think, $100,000 in liability. The umbrella policy would have covered the other $900,000.
So, the moral of this is, if you're having people work on your house, you need the contractor's policy, right? But then do you need the subcontractors to show that they're licensed, or are they working underneath? This gets very convoluted and very tricky because you don't know that they're subcontracting. You think they work for the person.
It gets really tricky, and this is where I lean heavy on my time in selling. I sold a lot of contractor policies in the beginning of my career, and most of the time when you have a general contractor, they're hiring subcontractors. But even sometimes subcontractors will hire other subcontractors. Like a flooring guy is going to hire someone just to do the install. Right. And a lot of times they want to see that they have coverage, especially when you're working in, bigger buildings, commercial projects. But a lot of times people in homes, they want to save money. They just want their flooring or their plumbing done. And they're just going to pay somebody to do it. Joe Blow from down the street probably doesn't have insurance.
Now this was a long time ago. This was like 9-10 years ago. When I moved into my home, I hired somebody, it was actually a client of mine, who did flooring. And then he had somebody come in to do the flooring, and that guy cut his fingers off. But thank God.
They didn't sue you.
But I had, obviously, I'm not the one running the machine, and
it's the same thing as, like, a lot of times people hear stories.
It was the tips of it, but it was bad. And my mother-in-law passed out. She was like, oh my God, all the blood.
A lot of times you hear stories about, somebody broke into somebody's property, or they went onto somebody's home.
And then they sue them.
And then they get hurt.
Right.
Even though they weren't supposed to be there, and then they sue them.
Right.
And that we live in such a litigious society that, like, umbrellas are a good thing to have because people are dumb. Like, they'll go. I had kids from my church prank my property 2 weekends ago.
Oh, your personal house?
My personal house. And I don't like pranks. I'm, like, not a prank type of guy. And it bugged me.
You don't like cursing either.
No, I don't. But they threw like 5 pounds of mashed potatoes on my front porch.
Like cooked?
Cooked mashed potatoes. It peeled the paint off of my front porch. And if they did it at 6:00 p.m., I wouldn't have been upset.
Why? Because you would have had dinner?
No, because I have a 2-year-old and a 5-month-old that it like scared my wife at 11 p.m. when they did it.
Oh, they did.
But let's say they would have tripped on my sprinkler head
running away.
and they broke their leg, and their parents said, oh, well, you know, they talked to some attorney that's trying to make a buck and said, well, you can sue them. Their homeowner's insurance has coverage. Well, now I'm in a lawsuit for them being idiots.
Right.
That's
So,
where umbrella can really
The
come
moral
into
of
play.
the story is that we all need umbrella policies. So what's a good number to reach you for it?
It is good to have umbrella, especially, I'll say this really quick, with teenagers. Especially if you're teenagers, you go out of town, they throw a party, there's drinking. That is where it can get really, really bad with lawsuits and people driving and things. And unfortunately, we've seen that in our community. But my phone number is 954-326-9842.
Brandon really knows what he's talking about when it comes to insurance, so I definitely recommend to give him a call. And if you're thinking about buying or selling, and it is a crazy market out there right now, the market is not what it used to be. It takes a lot of time, effort, and communication in order to get your home sold. So if you're looking for that special realtor, someone that is going to communicate and does this more than full time, maybe double time, give me a call. Triple. Laura Sanders, Remax Direct, 954-650-0827, or check me out on the web, lauracell.com. Till next week, have a great night.
Thank you for tuning in for Making Money with Laura Sanders, a name you can trust. To join the conversation, call us at the studio, 888-994-4995 Studio A, or contact Laura directly at 954-650-0827. Laura Sanders, a name